Sounds good.
Okay. Oh, we are live. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for putting up with our technical difficulties. I'm Nancy McDermott from Genspect USA, and I am so pleased to have Shawn, Thierry, who is the Director of Policy for Genspect USA, Ari DeWolf, who is our Interim Director, and I'm so pleased to also have Adam Coleman, who is wonderful and social, cultural commentator, and also models XXXY clothing. So we wanted to talk about what's going to happen with gender after the election. And so just to start out, we're going to play a clip that the Trump campaign put together talking about the day one changes to gender. So we're going to go ahead with that. So
the left-wing gender insanity being pushed on our children is an act of child abuse. Very simple. Here's my plan to stop the chemical, physical, and emotional mutilation of our youth. On day one, I will revoke Joe Biden's cruel policies on so-called gender-affirming care. Ridiculous. A process that includes giving kids puberty blockers, mutating their physical appearance, and ultimately performing surgery on minor children. Can you believe this? I will sign a new executive order instructing every federal agency to cease all programs that promote the concept of sex and gender transition at any age. I will then ask Congress to permanently stop federal taxpayer dollars from being used to promote or pay for these procedures and pass a law prohibiting child sexual mutilation in all 50 states. It'll go very quickly. I will declare that any hospital or healthcare provider that participates in the chemical or physical mutilation of minor youth will no longer meet federal health and safety standards for Medicaid and Medicare and will be terminated from the program immediately. Furthermore, I will support the creation of a private right of action for victims to sue doctors who have unforgivably performed these procedures on minor children. The Department of Justice will investigate Big Pharma and the big hospital networks to determine whether they have deliberately covered up horrific long-term side effects of sex transitions in order to get rich at the expense of vulnerable patients, in this case, very vulnerable. We will also investigate whether Big Pharma or others have illegally marketed hormones and puberty blockers, which are in no way licensed or approved for this use. My Department of Education will inform states and school districts that if any teacher or school official suggests to a child that they could be trapped in the wrong body, they will be faced with severe consequences, including potential civil rights violations for sex discrimination and the elimination of federal funding. As part of our new credentialing body for teachers, we will promote positive education about the nuclear family, the roles of mothers and fathers, and celebrating rather than erasing the things that make men and women different and unique. I will ask Congress to pass a bill establishing that the only genders recognized by the United States government are male and female, and they are assigned at birth. The bill will also make clear that Title IX prohibits men from participating in women's sports, and we will protect the rights of parents from being forced to allow their minor child to assume a gender which is new and an identity without the parent's consent. The identity will not be new, and it will not be without parental consent. No serious country should be telling its children that they were born with the wrong gender, a concept that was never heard of in all of human history. Nobody's ever heard of this, what's happening today. It was all when the radical left invented it just a few years ago. Under my leadership, this madness will end. Thank you very much.
Okay, so what do we think? Shawn, do you want to start us off?
Sure. First of all,
It's always a pleasure to join you all. Welcome and to everyone who's here. That's actually the first time I've seen the clip in its entirety. I saw snippets of it, and so it's extremely powerful. I really believe that President-elect Trump has really laid the gauntlet down, and this is a very, very pivotal moment in this time where we are confronted with transgender ideologists. However, I will say, as excited as I am for him to take this charge, which was really important, that he's coming out of the gate with it. I believe personally, and I would love to hear from everyone today, that those who are committed to this, I believe they see it as we saw it as a battle, but I believe they see it as a war. And I don't believe they're going to back down. There's been some timidity from Democratic elected officials around the country that we've seen, which is interesting. I saw today that Congresswoman Representative AOC, no longer has pronouns on her Twitter page or X page. We've had a couple of Democratic congressmen say that they now believe that biological males should not be on women's sports teams. However, I don't believe that the activists and the ideologues are going to stand down. So that's where I am on it. I believe that politicos and those that feel like they want to run with the tide right now are going to be a little more timid, but I believe the pressure is going to mount on them for them to continue to support this radical ideology.
Adam, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so just to kind of sort of respond to what she was just saying, I think the area, when you see those moments where it's slightly turning, I think the area we have to focus on is, why are politicians scared of the radical left? And it's because they can be loud. But I think that there's a point where they say, listen, we've been basically listening to these people, and we've gotten our butts kicked. And where has it benefited us? Because as much as we see people on the left who are going on Twitter and social media, seemingly not learning their lesson, I have seen some people, especially a few strategists, who have gone on television, and because they're Democratic strategists, they're also having these conversations behind the scenes, who have said, we've gone too far. And they've been beating the drum that we've been going too far, that regular people do not feel associated with this radical ideology. They do not like the whole pronouns thing. They do not like all these crazy concepts that were not a thing a handful of years ago. And so they're seeing the landslide victory from Trump as a way to say, this is a losing strategy. And these people that we've been listening to, we've been showing all this empathy to because we thought it was going to be politically beneficial to us, is not working. And I've been saying for quite some time, these radical left-wing organizations, for one, they're not the piggy banks for many of these politicians. They're organizations that give the impression that if you do not listen to them, they will make your life harder as a politician, or they'll make your party far more difficult. But the reality is that they're seeing that abiding by these people has gotten their butts kicked when it comes to election season. So I think what we're going to start seeing, and I think this is a good thing, we're going to start to see the pivot away from the far left, which is what I've been saying that they needed to do for quite some time, and starting to appeal to what regular people are saying. Now, there's going to be a struggle for it because there are a lot of elitists who are part of the Democratic Party who like this the pseudo-religion, who like this language, who like talking like this, who like seeing the world as oppression. And there is going to be a struggle, and there's going to be even more factions than there were years ago. But to go to what Trump was saying, I think the biggest part of what he said that really struck me, part of his problem when he was in office before, was that because he was new to politics, he didn't know how to play politics. And he had alienated too many people by being there, by being a bulldozer to get into office, including other Republicans. So there are many things that he tried to do, and he had to fight for it, even amongst his people within his own party. Now is a little bit different. It's not just that all three branches are going towards the Republicans. What's different is that there are people who are volunteering to be on board with what he is doing. He has far more support now. They're saying this is the winning way. We're behind Trump. It is a different vibe than years ago. And now he doesn't have to rely on writing executive orders for everything. Now he can go through the legislative process, because going through the legislative process means that it's more likely that whatever passes is going to stay that way, at least for quite some time. It is hard to undo a bill once you pass it through. They've been talking about repealing Obamacare for years, and it's still there. So these particular things, he has to stay away from doing things by the pen. It's easy to do an executive order, but it's also easy to undo. That's exactly what Joe Biden did when he got into office. He undid everything that Donald Trump did through the pen. So that's the thing that sticks out for me. He's talking about a legislative matter to solidify Title IX, solidify that it is between a man and a woman when it comes to sex, not gender, and to not impose these things on people.
Mm-hmm. Ari?
Well, I'm reminded of this opportunity we have, which is to govern, and govern in Congress, actually pass a bill. They can barely pass a budget, a farm bill. And so this is an opportunity, though, when you do govern, you have to bring people together across your own party's ideology and philosophy. And ideally, you make it a little bit bipartisan if you can. And so if it was anyone but Trump, I would just study his rhetoric. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your ideology, the man delivers on his program. And so I take him at his word that he will be serious in this endeavor. And he's already been in the ring with Big Pharma, both as a partner and as an adversary. It should be interesting to see how Robert F. Kennedy is activated. It will be interesting to see on the ground, those of us that are a part of sort of grassroots leadership in this movement, where his health freedom folks end up landing. And so I can get into the weeds on that, but I'll spare everyone. But I do think the rhetoric is important, because now is the time to be inclusive. If you do want to govern and you do want to use the bully pulpit that he has, then you want to make sure your language is inclusive, just like the doubling down on the word vulnerable. It's so important. That is just so critical. And so I'm reminded of Teddy Roosevelt's quote. I think before anyone knows, before it matters, how much you know, it matters to people that you care. And so I think he has a chance to pivot and really make it about the compassionate, make it about the moral high ground that we have on our side, and using his bully pulpit to spell out in frank terms what this is, as Shawn always refers to. She's like, hold on, guys, let's actually look at this and break it down. He's so good at doing that. And if he can do that, I think we actually get over a huge communications hump. And then it's just down to trying to actually pressure some lawmakers that might be a little bit more sympathetic to the Chamber of Commerce, sympathetic to the hospital systems, get over the big business hump. And then I think you can get something passed.
Shawn, this reminds me a bit of when you were telling your story about what happened to you in Texas, and about people who would privately agree with you, but then would keep their mouths shut. And it's just really interesting to see the people kind of coming out of the woodwork now and saying, well, I've always thought this was wrong, and are speaking up now. But even having said that, what do you think are the chances of him succeeding? I mean, I know we've talked about, I thought that was a really good point about the executive orders versus the legislation. But, what sort of pushback do you think he's going to get with this?
Well, If I may, I wanted to say, I think, for those of us who have been in this arena for so long, we know all of the different nuances to the ideology, but the average person at home really doesn't. And so that's why I said it's a cautionary tale, because what it seemed that the majority of Americans um, absolutely agree that biological males should not be in women's sports, biological female sports. So people say, okay, I got it. They don't agree that kids should be getting body parts amputated, mutilated, cut on. They don't agree with that. However, if you really look at what the transgender activists are talking about, I saw something today on social media, one of them who's very popular. She said, wait a minute, hold up. Don't give up on this. If we give in on this sports thing, that's going to affect our issue when it comes to birth certificates and changing birth certificates. That's going to affect puberty blockers. So even though Trump has issued an across the board statement, I think we have to look at will the administration I hope they understand that it's more than just the men and women's sports. Like, well, will they stop there, or will they understand that the ideologues have a much bigger blueprint than that? They don't want to give in on that. But if they could, they're licking their wounds and saying, okay, well, we're mad about the sports. However, we're still trying to trans children and trans America in other ways. And so that's what I would love for us to kind of get a little deeper in the weeds on, because so many folks are celebrating that, okay, we can stop the bleeding when it comes to men and women's sports. Now, the Ohio legislature also added on, though, that was good. They said biological males can't be in bathrooms in K through 12 and I think college bathrooms. But I don't know that the average American understands how much more is out there.
Mhm. Please feel free to jump in, anybody.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think this Trump administration is filled with people who've been highly focused on the cultural shifts. And I think that, let's say if we were to use Biden for an example, do I think that Biden understands what gender affirming care means? No, I don't think he does. I think he is fed lines, or he was fed lines as far as what to say by basically college grads, young staffers who come up with these things and come up with a script for him to repeat. But he doesn't fully grasp what this means. I think it might be different under Donald Trump as far as the people that he is surrounded by. Um, I am rather, you don't have to like every person that he picks. No one ever likes every person that's picked for an administration. But what I will say is that there are a number of people who he picked who are going to be in his circle who are familiar with the cultural shifts that are happening. And so that makes me a little bit more optimistic that if something becomes the new thing that they're attempting to do, that he may possibly be aware that it is happening. On top of Trump is always online, anyways. So Trump is very much so plugged in himself. So I think I'm not too worried that if there's a new strategy that he won't eventually find out. But I do think that much of what he said in that video, he attacked many of the things that we've been talking about for years to basically, I don't want to say completely eliminate it because they'll find something else. But man, if he was able to quickly pass something solidifying this as law, that would stop majority of it, and it would really set these activists back.
Well, yeah, and if he could, I'm sorry, Ari, real quick, I'm just,
No, please, of
Ari, if
course,
he could
absolutely.
actually establish that there are only two genders and two sexes versus 76 genders, you're absolutely right, or 150.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'd have to start there. And you're exactly right. If that becomes the premise that the law of the land and the premise, as he said, since the beginning of time, once again, then that probably does take care of changing birth certificates for babies based on the parents' wishes and all these other, bizarre types of things people want to do. So I want to say I agree with you there.
If I can,
And
if I could just
of
add
course,
one quick
absolutely.
thing.
Yes. Yeah, it's going to be better
So-
than my point. Go ahead.
So there's like one small area. I just want to say this before I forget. There's one small area which is kind of a good thing and kind of it can be tricky because he does mention without the parents' consent. And I think sometimes we might focus on the teacher who is trying to trans a child, but we also forget that there are parents who are fully on board with this stuff, who are pushing their children in this direction, who are transing their children, who are leading their children down this path, and they have the full consent of the parent to do this. So there's going to be like a weird area where, yes, we in general we want parental consent as far as parents should know what is happening with their children. Parents should be able to dictate how what is going on with their children. But I think there needs to be some clear defining lines as far as what abuse is. Just because I have the allowance to tell my son what to do, I have the right to tell my son what to do, and I have the duty to tell my son what to do. I can't beat him in the face with a broom, right? That would be abuse. There's a line. So we have to figure out where is that line as far as consent, and where is that line as far as what is determined as abuse? Because I don't know if the government has necessarily had that discussion as far as this particular movement being identified as abuse. He mentioned the doctors can't do this, right? That's fine. But where is the line where it says that the parents can and cannot do certain things because it is considered abusive to do so? And I think it needs to go beyond consent. We need to know the defining line as far as okay, well, if I grab some puberty blockers through a third party and give it to my child, right? They have my consent and they didn't go directly to a doctor. I got it through illegal means. They're not really going to go after me because I got some pills. Maybe not. But I gave it to my child. Is it me giving it to my child, my consent to do so? Is that okay? Like this is where we need to kind of hone in. I hope I'm making sense.
No, you're making perfect sense. And I think, one of the tricky things is that, in general, at a time when parental authority is under attack, we want to find a way to do that so that we don't undermine all the authority of all parents.
Right.
And I think, there are certain things that we recognize that we don't allow, like we don't allow parents to give, to get their kids drunk or to give them illegal drugs. And my instinct is that it needs to probably happen that way. And then, when it becomes widely recognized, I think it'll be much easier to draw the line because you'll have a consensus of parents who understand that it's a problem. But it's poor Ari.
Oh no! This was all a perfect segue. This is why I let you all build so that I can put a little cherry on top.
You can sum it up.
So what I see again is this need to be empowered by our rhetoric, because if we don't do this right, we're going to, as one of the most learned lawmakers I have in my corner reminded me the day after the election, no time to celebrate. She said, Ari, half of the country thinks we are Nazis and that we are enabling Nazism, and that there will be a Fourth Reich happening. And so we can't lose sight of, even though we win, we get a mandate, we get these institutions, we still have half the country, just like when he first was elected, half the country thought there's a deep state in control. The other half thought Russia's in control. Where do you go? How do you govern a nation like that? And so my concern is and I know this for a fact because, and I'll lift the veil because I think people like that. We know from conservative institutions in law that there are not enough public intellectuals out here actually talking about that really important nuance that we're just trying to get some words around, because that's why I think this movement is so important. Is brought in new voices. We've brought in a renewed civil society, because a lot of the folks that are victim to this don't have anywhere else to go. So this movement has created its own rival institutions and its own rival leaders, people that would never have thought themselves to be the heroes of the hour and the age, but they are. And so that's what's exciting to me, is that this does allow us to lead in the way that we've been leading to get the states to pass the bills that they have. So now we can help lead the federal government, because I do know this, the congressional staff is hesitant to take this on because they don't know if their members are prepared to talk about it. Because, you know, just like an issue in public life, you hear about it, you know, maybe through an ad, maybe through your uncle, so to a congressional hearing, you'll hear one or two sound bites, right? And there'll be something that will be deleterious to the movement. And so we have to proceed with great caution, but we do have the resources and the talent to lead, but we just now get to show our friends in the federal government, just as we have on the state level.
So there's an interesting point in the chat that I think it's worth bringing up, which is that some of these procedures are essentially cosmetic, but they're being posed as healthcare. And it's a distinction that we need to be able to make to people to clarify kind of what's going on here. And I think this brings me to something I was thinking about. I don't know if any of you saw any of the Joe Rogan interviews with JD Vance and Trump and yeah. I mean, I'm wondering because it's fairly obvious about sports. I think you can just kind of look at that and see that it's unfair, but there is a lot of subtlety in this. And it's not the kind of thing I don't think that you can capture in sound bites. And I'm wondering if, you know, on this issue, but also, you know, just in the election in general, we have a kind of a new kind of media where you have these long form discussions and you can really go into some of the nuance. I'm not trying to say that podcasts are the answer, but I do think it's interesting that, you know, when you have a little bit more time, you can make things clearer to people. So that was just a comment, but anything else you want to jump in with here? It also, you know, I was particularly wondering, was there anything that we felt was left out that could have just been put in that top line of promises?
I mean, I think he covered it quite simply in that it was a catch-all when he said, look, there's just two sexes or two genders. But I always, again, warn folks that I'm kind of challenge you on your point a little bit, Nancy, that when you overcomplicate this, that's when you make a mistake. You know, my grandpa used to say, talk long, talk wrong. You know, when you get too deep in the weeds about something that essentially what we're saying is just common sense, basic biology, basic humanity. It does. I think that's what the other side, the ideologues on this issue, are counting on. They want us to talk about whether it's cosmetic or this or that. And so, and the point is, it's very important to talk about parents and parental and consent, because that is ultimately the problem. It was the parents that were pushing this on kids. You know, it is parents who are telling 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds that I'm going to stop you from going into puberty. It is parents that are sterilizing their daughters by saying, you're never going to menstruate. I'm going to put you on Lupron at 9 and 10 before you start your cycle so that you will be more able to be a full-blown boy or a man when you get older. It is parents that are giving their boys these medicines so they do not develop as young men. And so I think that we really have to deal with that. I took the way President Trump, when he was saying without the parents' consent, I think that kind of got misunderstood. I always heard him, I guess because I know his point, was he was meaning is they're doing this behind parents' back. You know, I don't really think he meant that if the parents did consent, it would be okay. But it does need to be clear. But we took care of that in Texas. I mean, I paid the price for it. But SB 14, I think, is model legislation. And until that is the law in all 50 states, we are going to have a problem. SB 14 said, hands down, it's not about parental consent. The child cannot consent to this. The child cannot consent to have a double mastectomy when they don't have cancer. You know, a child cannot consent to cutting off their genitals. You know, a child cannot consent to taking these drugs that will permanently sterilize you or castrate you. So I think that until we have legislation across the board that says it's a matter of public policy, and yes, it is abuse. I fear that when we use that word, that we get into that debate of what's abusive. Um, we took care of that though in so many other states. And so again, that's why I wonder. For example, I used this analogy once before. I have an 11-year-old daughter. She's 12 actually now. She turned 12 last week. I cannot, in the state of Texas, and I don't know about other states, I cannot take my daughter and go put tattoos all over her face or anywhere on her body, even if she wants it and even if I want it. Because as a matter of public policy, we have always understood that that is a life-altering decision that a child cannot make, and that a parent who would do such a thing would be, as you said, committing an abusive act. It's for the life of me, I cannot understand how we got from not putting a tattoo on a child to saying on their arm to saying I could cut off an entire body part. So I always caution that we've got to stay in the same analogy as that we already have laws that protect children in this way, and gender ideologues are no exception. They do not get to circumvent the laws that are already established to protect kids.
And you're saying they hide behind the mystique, right? There's this wall of course, the credentialed class, the professional class, but then this idea of healthcare, right? It's just we just take it at face value. But at the same time, and here I'll back you up, Nancy, on where the value of a more nuanced approach, I think, is warranted. It's in long form journalism. It's in following the lives of a detransitioner, going from doctor to doctor, hospital system to hospital system, seeking actual health care, seeking actual relief from everything that's been born from going through this medicalization.
Uh-oh. I think we lost Ari.
Freezing a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in while Ari's frozen. I agree with you. I think there needs to be a clear line, like a bright line. But I think one of the problems we have is that so many parents have been blackmailed into this. Basically, you know, do it or your child will commit suicide. So I think it's much easier for parents to push back, but you know, we're coming off a period where, you know, they just really didn't feel like they had a leg to stand on. So I think we should just bear that in mind. Adam, do you want to come in while we wait for Ari?
So I was going to say that, well, for one, I agree with everything that was being said before. I think she's right as far as overcomplicating something that is simple. Someone who doesn't listen to podcasts, barely pays attention to politics, goes to work, works 9 to 5, turns on the TV, and look at someone and say, that's fair or not fair. That's a boy or that's a girl. Like they don't need a dissertation. There doesn't need to be this long conversation about gametes and all types of stuff. It is very clear, just like it's been clear throughout human history, the difference between the two and the advantages between the two. So I think sometimes we can go down that super complicated biological and this, well, in this species, they have this. And I've seen that stuff. And I think that doesn't benefit the argument that we're trying to make of it being obvious. something that is obvious. You don't have to take a scalpel and dissect. It's just obvious. Like we just know what it is. And that's what biological sex is. It's obvious. It's not something that we should have a 2-hour debate over to figure out who is right and who's wrong. I feel like allowing that particular type of debate, not allowing, people can talk about whatever they want, but I think that as a strategy is a strategy that benefits the left-wing ideologues, because they're showing if we're willing to engage in this long conversation to dissect something that is so obvious, then it must not be obvious. And I think that that's the crux here. Now, I do agree we should highlight detransitioners. We should have the long form stories of people. Storytelling, that's my MO when it comes to writing. I tell a lot of stories, and it's because it connects with people. We understand. There's a reason why Chloe Cole connects with people, because she's telling her story of what she went through. It's Chloe Cole saying something through the experience, and Bob, who never went through that and who's just stating some sort of fact, is going to be received differently, right? And the person that you're going to feel empathetic towards is Chloe. And the more empathy that you have towards someone, the more likely you are willing to do something about it. The more you're likely to hear something, hear them out. There's a reason why George Floyd was such a big impact. It's because there was a story behind it. One man changed the world. One man got the attention of the entire world, whether you agreed with the narratives or not. We all know this man's name. And that's just one story. And he wasn't even intentionally trying to have us know his name. So that's the power of having a story. And I think the political right needs more stories, but we'll just say, not even like right or left, team reality needs more stories about being in reality. But I do think that this resounding win for Trump shows that team reality, the average Joe, the working person, who's not hooked into all this nonsense, finally had their voice heard. And it's very clear. And it's so clear that anyone who attempts to say that this election was stolen seems like a complete moron. This man won every swing state. It's not even close. It's a resounding win. And that's why Democrats are feeling the way that they feel. If it was close, if he had just won the Electoral College, right, and he didn't win the popular vote, just like last time, then it would be a different response. But I think that there's a possibility that when he gets into office, when he does go towards these things, you're going to start to see a shift in attitude from certain Democrats. Others, maybe not, right? The progressive left, they may stay exactly where they're at because that's their belief system. But as I say this as a former Democrat, I think that many Democrats were, frankly, too scared to be honest. They're too scared of the radical left and what they might do. They might primary me and they might do this. They're far too scared of losing their seat than being truthful and standing up to these people. And so they just complied. So maybe AOC taking out her pronouns is a sign, or maybe it was an accident, an oversight. I have no idea. But I do think that this may give more credence to the moderate Democrat that still exists, but has been hiding and shutting their mouth as the crazy left has gotten even crazier, thinking that the crazy left is the majority when they're the vast minority. So I think this may be quite literally a referendum as to how out of control things have gotten. And we're just trying to get back to the center. And the last thing I'll say is, I think we're going to finally get to a point where people might start to realize that Donald Trump, one, isn't a Nazi. I don't believe that half the country thinks that he's a Nazi. I think that most of the messaging coming through our media states that a lot of people feel this way. There are a number of people who don't like him for whatever reason. People don't like him because they think he's a racist or whatever their reasoning is. But I don't think it's half the country. And quite literally, by results of votes, half the country does not feel that way. Majority of the country feels the complete opposite. And so I do want us to have some sort of positive look on his win as being a sign of normalcy, a sign where people are saying, actually, this guy is a retread of the Democrats of 15 years ago, of 2008 Obama, who said, no, illegal immigrants, you can't just come here and do whatever you want. You're going to have to go back home and follow the process. Donald Trump, quite literally, just if you look at policy, he sounds like an old school Democrat, which is why he's appealing today, because that's how far things have shifted. So that's the last thing I'll say. And you guys go.
So welcome back, Ari. I want to. There are some. There's some fun things in the chat. People are calling you a goddess, Shawn.
That's sweet.
which is excellent. I wish
I had some fairy dust powder or something, and I could
Oh,
just wave a magic wand and
You
make all of
Oh,
this
you
better
do.
for everybody overnight.
Yeah, and I mean, and there are quite a few parents in the chat who've had the experience of being attacked and really pushed into a corner by clinicians and people who have told them that they have to affirm when they didn't really want to. So I think there's probably some nuance there that we need to think about. The other thing that has come up in the chat are some of these horror stories about people whose kids have been taken because they wouldn't affirm. I mean, there have been a couple of stories recently in the news about that, and I don't know how these promises would affect that. I mean, that might be something that we might want to think about.
HF 146, that's Governor Tim Walz's bill in Minnesota.
Yes.
I mean, that would need to be overturned. He literally is circumventing the law in Texas and other states where obviously SB 14 in Texas says you have to be 18 now to do this type of surgery or take these types of prescription drugs. Tim Walz's bill says, well, if you're in a divorce case and there's a custody battle and you have any kind of nexus connection to Minnesota, one parent can take the child over the other parent's objection, because he flipped it around. Actually, he said it's abuse not to give the puberty blockers. It's abuse not to cut off a body part. And he's saying you can go to Minnesota and start this process over the parent's objection and take that child. It also can be considered grounds for abuse and whether they would let you keep custody of your child. So that is as extreme as it gets. And if you notice, they hid it during the election. The media never asked him about this crazy piece of legislation that he signed into law and had a whole bill signing ceremony for. Nobody talked about it. And so the point is, yes, will they run from it? Will they overturn it? Or will, and I don't think they will unless the media starts to expose that this was very extreme. And he was literally holding parents hostage, one parent, and saying, I'll take your child from you. If your daughter's name is Kelly and you won't call her Kevin and you won't put her on puberty blockers and you won't agree to give her a mastectomy, come to Minnesota and we'll be your transgender sanctuary state, is what he called it. And so I think it's really important, y'all, to know we still got a lot of policies out there that President Trump and his administration is going to have to tackle. And I think that's why he was so emphatic and direct about it, that he wasn't going to mince words. But Governor Walz is just one example of a politician that quadrupled down on this.
And we've got a third branch too. And I know we'll probably have a webinar discussing Skirmeti soon, but just because we do have a lawyer on retainer right now, hopefully you're free for the hour. I can't afford your services, but do you think that by one side going to such an extreme, calling it child abuse and getting it caught up in family courts, and then I suppose our side to some extent getting nearly there, not quite as extreme, do you think that accelerates, just like Scrimeti just magically got accelerated to the courts to decide this narrow question about equal protection? Do you think that sort of race to the bottom in just draconianism, does that help like lead this to the Supreme Court eventually? Shawn, do you have any thoughts on that?
Can you just say what this committee is, just in case anybody doesn't know, just real quick?
Go ahead, Ari.
Should we give it to the lawyer? Well, we're
No,
all
go ahead,
lawyers
Ari. We
now
were already
because
talking
we've
about it.
all had to learn, everyone in this movement's had to learn everything about government. So you've got a case out of Tennessee. It was SB 1, and it was a pretty typical ban on gender transitioning for minors, just like SB 14, a gold standard in Shawn's mind, and I agree. So the bill was passed, and it just flew to the Supreme Court. It was so unprecedented to see this move so quickly. And the most important point is it's got a very narrow scope in what they're deciding. And that is if being a trans kid, if that is going to be a protected class under equal protection. And so that will have a sweeping effect. In some ways, everything that this movement has built could be, in many ways, sustained. It could also be utterly obliterated as well. And so the oral arguments are on, I believe, the 4th of December. Many of us will be there. So, yeah, Shawn, take it away if you have any legal
Yeah,
theories.
I was going to say, because it was an election year, I mean, obviously we like to think our courts are insulated, but politics matter. And I think that is what accelerated and put it on the fast track. The outcome will be determinative of the future of this movement, this radical movement. I will tell you, having, as you said, been a former Democrat, when I left the party, I said that the party had been hijacked by progressives who are in an abyss. I think I said this progressive abyss. It would be interesting to see if the Democrat Party, even though we're hearing about moderates and everybody is saying, hey, now maybe I can speak up too. I will tell you that it runs deep. Even the questionnaires when you're running for an office or when you're up for reelection, every questionnaire from every Democratic endorsement organization or club has a question on it that says, do you believe that trans children are entitled to gender affirming care? If you don't check yes, you will not get the endorsement. I think that's going to be the litmus test. Do they take that question off of every questionnaire around the country for every Democrat that's running for office? It even was on the questionnaire, you all. I'll show you how deep it is, and I'll pause. The AFL-CIO, the union questionnaire. It was not just about fair wages and safe working conditions. Like, how did this become a labor issue? I did not get their endorsement, even though I had many votes, a perfect voting record for safe working conditions for laborers. But they said, because I did not believe in, quote, gender affirming care, I say child mutilation, that I could not get their endorsement. I don't believe that question is going to go off of those questionnaires simply because of this sweeping mandate. I think the Democrat Party is in a huge conundrum right now. They are spiraling because, yes, there are moderates that are saying, look, you guys, we've got to stop the bleeding. But then there are others that are saying that the reason Kamala Harris did win one swing state is because she didn't talk about this enough, that she ran too much as a moderate. And that she wasn't progressive enough. So they were literally saying that she didn't speak her truth, her reality, that she ran from the fact that she wanted transgender prisoners to get tax-funded sex changes. So there's going to be that debate for a while. And so I just wanted to kind of tell what I knew from behind the scenes, that these questionnaires are very real. And, until those type of litmus tests go off of those questionnaires of whether or not they're going to support you, the party will continue to be captured.
Well, that's
And
where
if I
it
could
begins
just,
to feel very sort of religious, like, are you one of us kind of thing.
if I could just throw a little shade on the Republicans, because I come from the SPN network. We are the sort of conservative reform libertarian think tank people that try and hold the party to what it tells grandma at the door when it gets her vote. or what it tells a donor when it gets his or her money. And so very policy oriented, very much results oriented and results driven. And so unfortunately you have with the Republicans an issue like this dying in secret. You have the chambers of commerce, you have the hospital interests, you've got the crony capitalists that are able to, through a speaker, kill it in the dark, or through an interest group whose interest it is for this to be prolonged, kill it in the dark. And so I just want to encourage everyone, whatever your party is, I tell people, stay as independent as you can, because that way you have something over them and you've got something to leverage because they all want your vote. And so just know that it's a human failing, right? It is not so much one party or the other. In many ways, the Republican Party is under a coup to become more of a working class party than sort of the country club. So we are in an interesting time. But the most important piece is that I guess we're all populists now, right? We all want a government responsive to us, and we want to have a little bit more of a control that we're wielding. And I think now is the perfect chance to do that, either party.
So we're getting down to the last few minutes. A couple things we haven't really talked about are the institutions. I mean, Trump is putting forward some very interesting things about clearing out the bureaucracy. We've also had a few questions asked about professional organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics, some of the other professional organizations. Do we have any thoughts on how this may affect those institutions? And also, there's I think Sasha said, I'm afraid they're going to double down, and she might be right. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that they're going to lose money, and that's a good thing. I think the biggest way to make people change is to hit them by the pockets. And same thing with institutions. If there is a threat that their money could be, their livelihoods could be taken from them, for example, if they say your business could be shut down, your license could be taken away, your medical license could be taken away if you perform gender affirming care or child mutilation on a minor, they're not going to do it, and only the extremists would risk, trying to become some sort of gender affirming care Harriet Tubman, trying to transition children in secret. But the likeliness of that happening are slim. I think people care about their money far more than they do their ideology. And so I think that type of thing, yeah, it's going to hit them in the pockets. And honestly, I think the only reason it's gotten to this degree is because everyone saw the money involved. No one saw the kids. They just this is like one of those things I'm writing about in my book. But a massive cultural problem that we have is that the adults treat children like adults, and then the adults get to act like children. And so they said, well, yes, I know they're 10 years old, but they really want to be a girl. And so the 10-year-old who still has their brain developing for the next decade gets to make a life-altering decision. And then here comes the greedy adult who's in the medical profession taking the money from the insurance companies. And everyone's just making money off of human suffering. And that's what's been happening. When you take away the dollar incentive, suddenly people have a change of heart. When you threaten their livelihood, suddenly people change their behavior. Same thing with lawsuits. Sometimes you got to sue them. That's just what it is. And so the threat of lawsuit, the threat of losing their medical license, the threat of losing their businesses and getting shut down because they're abusing children, I think it will change a lot of people's behavior. So I'm looking forward to that.
I agree. I think causes of action are going to be filed over the next decade, left and right. And this will go down as the biggest medical scandal of our time. We will look back at this and say, remember when they were actually cutting up kids' genitalia? Remember when they were actually giving kids as young as 9 chemotherapy, prostrate drugs, chemotherapy drugs, and the kids didn't even have cancer. They were giving them those drugs to stunt their growth. people will remember this, and it will be a scandal. And so right now, yes, we're right at the cusp, and thank God, President Trump stepped up and he's laying down the gauntlet. But as in any battle of good and evil, as we have said before, they're not going to go quietly in the night. You're exactly right. Money makes a difference. It was money that drove it, and I guess it's going to be money that drives it away. Last I'll say is I signed up the other day for a new cable company, and I might say the name on Twitter. I guess I won't say it tonight. But I was a little surprised that when I switched and I was creating my profile, it asked me what my preferred pronouns were. And it just let me know right then and there that their management, their C-suite management, their CEOs, they've already bought into that. They see that. Actually, it was before the election. It's about a month or two ago, a month and a half ago. They saw that as money making. They did that to induce customers because they felt that the movement was so popular that if we just throw this on there, like why would you need to know my pronoun when I'm just signing up for a streaming service for cable? Pronouns. Uber Eats, I think, has it. Some of the DoorDashes have it, the driving services. So, and I get it. I guess people get in the car and say, you used the wrong pronoun. Until all that, until the word misgendering goes away and all of that and those kind of threats, I think we'll be dealing with this. But I definitely think we're on the right track.
Well, maybe in closing, I will give a word of hope, as been encouraged by my fellow panelists. Congressional spending. Yes, I do think there's something there, or I should say lack thereof. I can assure you there will be very smart people ready to help members of Congress identify where the money is going in so far as research, especially around this issue. And it is pretty amazing once you start peeling the numbers back. And so that's not a bill, but that does have an effect, just like we're talking about in the private sector, whether it's a professional, like a doctor, you're trying to get to change his behavior. You can change whole universities and other research institutions based off of the cutback of funding. And so that's something that is relatively less dramatic for Congress to take on and to be done in a less public way. So they're probably more reticent to do so. But I think, again, most importantly, what has brought us to this moment, it is this enlarged sense of citizen and the responsibilities and the rights that we each have as individuals. And so I think that is the most important takeaway. Whatever issue comes up in the future, we know what we've done in this movement, and it's quite impressive. And it's been borne largely by those who've been the victims, frankly. And so I just want to give kudos to all the people who have brought us to this moment. Leo Tolstoy has a theory: there are no such thing as great men, right? It requires everyone underneath them and to make the times that allow them to achieve what they've achieved. So I think Trump would agree. It's thanks to all of the little people who have just done a yeoman's work in their private lives and a great sacrifice to get us to this point. So I think you will all also get us over the finish line as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most inspiring things about this election was the what they call low propensity voters. I mean, people who wouldn't necessarily have voted, but are activated and are paying attention now. I mean, the one thing I would say about the pronouns and the HR initiatives and the language is that I can't help but feel that that a lot of people don't go along with it. It's been something that's imposed on them, and I'm hoping that this election, this kind of turning point in American life, will make people feel that they can say, no, why are you spending time on that? We have other things that are so much more important about that, and really start to make the concept of self-rule actually mean something again. Anyway, we don't have a ton. We're almost out of time. I just want to thank everybody for coming. All of the great chat. I'm so grateful, Adam. So grateful, Ari, for filling in for Eitan, who I should say has a gag order now and can't talk. And especially to you, Shawn. I mean, you've done so much for this, and I'm so grateful. And you are our goddess, so thank you for thank you for coming along.
Yes.
And we're at an hour. Thank you, everyone. And I don't know if we're still live, so